My dear partners in service, for years, human beings have searched for the secret of leadership. Why do some leaders achieve enviable results, and why is it that others don't? Everybody loves the stories of heroes like Nelson Mandela, Mother Teresa, and Mahatma Gandhi. We tend to exalt these individuals as role models and celebrate their achievements. To most of us, these are embodiment of inspired leadership. But these great leaders might not be the right role models for Rotary leadership, because our work is not to dedicate our entire life to a public cause. In many ways, it is modesty, it is restraint, and it is togetherness among our leaders that leads to the extraordinary achievements of Rotary as an organization. For instance, as our recently released annual report states, we set an all-time fundraising record for the Rotary Foundation. Last year, we raised more than $440.9 million. As the chair of the Rotary Foundation last year, can I take the credit for that achievement? No, definitely not. In fact, past President Holger and I were two individuals who never saw our own office at one Rotary Center the whole of last year. The Rotary Foundation's success was possible because 1 million Rotarians all over the world showed generosity in their support, and of course the trustees and directors and zone and district leaders pointed them in the right direction. Thus, in reality, leadership describes what leaders symbolize rather than what they achieve. Yet, it's an undeniable fact that the health of a district, to a large extent, depends on the actions of leadership. Therefore, the point I want to begin with is that sometimes we tend to assume that the leader acts in isolation, and we tend to undervalue the role of followers and companions. In fact, one of the most defining aspects of leadership is how inherently isolating it can be for people in position. How easy it is to be surrounded by people who only echo what they want to hear. In such times, their partner is sometimes the only one capable of giving them unfiltered advice. And don't for a moment think you don't understand leadership. Simon Sinek is an author and an inspirational speaker. I heard him once describe that the closest thing to leadership is parenting. Many of you are parents. You have to be an infinite student of parenting. You ask your friends, you ask your own parents, you join groups, you read magazines, you watch talks. You're constantly learning and adjusting to this constantly changing challenge of being a parent, and its ups and downs and successes and failures, and that's what leadership is about. Great leaders continue to be students of leadership. No matter how successful they are still learning. My wife, quiet as she looks, is pretty good at giving me unfiltered advice, whether I like it or not. She constantly ensures that in all the leadership positions I've held, that I do not allow my ego to drive me, and she makes sure that my feet are firmly planted on the ground and that I stay humble. I think you will probably find several of my past president friends tell you the same thing. So often, we observe overconfident and conceited leaders when the need is for leaders with humility. Humility, my friends, in my view, is essential to be a great leader. Without humility, it will be very hard for anyone in charge to acknowledge their mistakes, learn from experience, take into account other people's perspectives, and be willing to change and get better. Humility is a critical driver of leadership, effectiveness in both men and women. Now, does that mean that such a person cannot also be highly competitive and ambitious? They could, but they tend to avoid the spotlight and they constantly give credit to their teams. They also ask for help and listen to feedback from others, setting an example that causes subordinates to do the same. Leadership is also by example, and the role of the partner is as important as the Rotary leader. Allow me to give you 3 different examples of ways in which a Rotary partner can make a difference. Raja Sabu was RI president when I was district governor way back in the 90s. A very successful businessman who built an empire from scratch. Yet the person who made him realize that making money was not everything and that he had another significant role to play in sharing his talents to serve others was his partner Usha. Quiet, diminutive in size, but giant in character. In many ways, she is the driving force in his service activities, and I call her the Mother Teresa of Rotary. Both of them had led over 35 teams of doctors in medical camps to Africa and other places. As president of Rotary International, I have visited one of their camps in Rwanda. So did Barry Racine in Madagascar and Mark Maloney in Zimbabwe when they were presidents. And as hard as Raja worked in the operating theatre, we could also observe Usha working even harder. Cradling a just operated child, I heard her say, "I can't be a doctor, but I can be a mother." Ian Risley was a much-liked president. He speaks very well. He's also obsessive about speaking to the time allocated. There were times he believed when he was speaking to a group that his enthusiasm took over and he might be rambling a bit. He also noticed that this was particularly a problem when he was responding to a question that can be answered in several ways. He tended to address all the options. Early in his marriage, he realized that his partner, Juliet, was a wonderful sounding board, especially for speeches that were scripted. He wondered why she could not do the same for his impromptu speeches. That meant he needed to devise a way in which she could convey to him that he was going off track, or as he says, getting into his rambling mode. Well, that's easier said than done. Obviously, she could not stand up when he was speaking and, wave a handkerchief or something like that. So they thought about the options. Maybe she could sit in the front row and pretend to yawn. But what happens if she genuinely yawned in the most interesting part of the speech? That wouldn't do either. Then it occurred to them that Juliet wore spectacles all the time. So they agreed that if she took off her glasses, pretending to clean them, that was the message that Ian was off cue. So when he speaks unscripted, off the cuff, he occasionally glances in her direction to see if she's polishing her glasses. Of course, mind you, he does not necessarily follow her all the time. And in that case, I don't wish to speculate on any consequences that may arise later in their home. So now you know that if you ever see Juliet taking off her glasses when our incoming trustee chair is speaking, then you know he's probably going off script. After the tsunami of 2004, my district raised more than $12 million to build 25 new schools which had been destroyed by the waves. It was also a period of time when a civil war was raging in the country and the eastern part of the country was under the control of the militants. As an unofficial taxation policy, it was customary for the militants to levy a 10% tax on every transaction in that region. 4 of the Rotary schools were being built in this region. Our building contractors turned up at our committee meeting one day and complained that because our accounts were so transparent and every minute building costs and payments were being displayed in a very visible manner on the website, they were being compelled to pay this 10% levy, and that Rotary should reimburse this expense. After a long discussion, and having consulted our donors, we agreed to that payment. At home that evening, my wife noticed my pensive frame of mind and asked what the problem was. With some reluctance, I told her our predicament. The only comment she had was, "It's a shame that our donors are being subjected to this." Now that set me thinking. The next day, I convened our committee again and discussed this matter once more. We asked why we should allow ourselves to be subjected to this type of extortion. We sent word out to the contractors that we will not pay this levy and that if need be, we will stop building these schools. A few days later, I received a call. The caller identified himself as representing the militants and suggested that we should reconsider our decision to stop the legitimate payment due to them. I countered that, it was a committee decision and there was nothing I could do about it. The caller told me that he believed I was not being truthful, and that I was responsible for such a decision, and that I had the power to reverse it if I so chose, and that if the decision was not so reversed, there would be consequences. He also added, rather ominously, that they were aware that I travel overseas a lot, and that I should know that they have people all over the world, and that they could get me anywhere. I went cold. My hands were shaking. My heart was racing. I had no illusions about what that threat meant. Very simply, it meant that they would kill me. And I knew that they did have the power to do so. It was not for nothing that they were known as one of the most feared terrorist organizations in the world. Nonetheless, I steeled myself and told him on the phone that I represented a large organization, being a trustee of the foundation, and that if they touched a hair on my head, and that time I had much more hair, their funding would get cut off from every country where Rotary functioned. With that, I put the phone down. Of course, I knew that if anything was to happen to me, perhaps all that would happen from Rotary would be a somber letter from John Hugo announcing my demise, and maybe suggesting contributions can be sent to the Rotary Foundation. But of course, the militants would not know that. My bluff worked, and they stopped soliciting any further funds from our projects, and they left us severely alone. In fact, one of the schools we built in that region won an award for architecture. However, the person who made the difference was my wife, when she told me, "It's a shame we have to submit to this extortion." And I realized that we did not have to, and was able to convince my committee to support me in that decision. And if you look around, you will find tons of examples in history of successful partnerships. Priscilla and Mark Zuckerberg jointly committed their wealth to promoting equal opportunity. Bill and Melinda Gates, in happier times, put together the world's largest philanthropy. Queen Victoria and Prince Albert were a couple who relied on each other, and practically, politically, and emotionally. That's why, after Albert's death, the Queen wore black clothes for the rest of her life and was nicknamed the Widow of Windsor. Pierre and Marie Curie were a scientific pair They had real chemistry that led to their discovery of the elements of radium and polonium in 1898. Martin Luther King Jr. may have got far more of the civil rights spotlight, but Coretta King worked side by side, and they were devoted partners in activism. Closer to home, there is another couple who are great examples of how to support each other in leadership positions. You may even have heard of them. Jennifer Jones and Nick Krasich. Marvelous couple, always backing each other. Yes, there is no reason that each of you also cannot reach these heights. All of you have chosen to accept and embrace this challenge because you believe that a Rotary leader with a supportive partner will achieve more than one without. This year, my friends, can be a grand adventure, one that tests you, brings you closer, and brings out the best in you both. But that will only happen if you are in it together. You've been given this gift of this opportunity with your partner. It may never come again, so grasp it with both hands and help make the next year a roaring success. May God bless you and keep you.